Silk roads. And so we're going to see in this segment how the world's more connected than you thought it was. Way back when it was more connected than you thought it was way back when. And so what we mean by the Silk Roads are essentially, over time, it's a bunch of series of roads that get grouped into some major networks, going all the way from China into Europe and up and down and in between, all over the place. And this road was around a long time, or these roads, really, we should say. And we mean shipping lanes too, and not just a couple of the main arteries or something more simplistic. And it depends on which period you looked at. So if, say, one of you are going to do your first presentation or your second presentation now on this, you go to look at your at the Silk Roads. It would be, you can find maps that are a lot more detailed, what's not in commission at the time, and so on. Okay, so it links Afro-Eurasia, rulers heavily invested in the construction of roads and bridges. This sounds obvious, I guess, to us, but it's tough to get around the ancient world on land. I just think of all the geographic obstacles, big caverns, mud. How are you going to move? For them at the time, your troops, if you want to project power, and so on. And so indeed, primarily for the military and administrative reasons. But after they get built, then people say, well, we can do other things on them as well. So sometimes long after the military reason is gone, especially we're getting down to Alexander of Macedon later. Encouraged trade. This campaign did not build the entire Silk Road. We hear this in the West quite a bit, that Alexander of Macedon, Alexander the Great is who they mean here, built the Silk Roads. But really we just mean this part of it through India. And it's not just the main veins here. You get more detailed ones like I was just talking about off the map. And then combine this with existing trade networks that are already there in the East. And then now you've got a big, long trade network. They're going to figure out about the monsoon winds from India and how you can sort of ride them here for a certain time of the year and then ride them back for another time of the year. Same thing on the other side. And all of a sudden, you've got a fairly connected world. Right? Okay, so they're addressing, they're trying to give you the scope of it here. This was, lots of people were trading all over the place, and indeed, this has been around a long time anyway. So while we did not have the Silk Roads in the Bronze Age proper before all this period, we know from things like how people made bronze differently in different sections of the world, meaning what they thought anyway was making copper harder. Sometimes it was, right? So tin and some of the other things they would put in it. But sometimes they would just get a goofy idea and then have a false correlation. Like they thought that this thing was giving it some extra spice and making the bronze extra good, but really didn't have anything to do with it. And that was more or less a local phenomenon. So then we can see from that if somebody is making before this period was making bronze this weird way, and nobody else, none of the other smiths on Earth were doing this at the time. It is really odd how they can find sections, say from Egypt, they would find it in what we now call England, right, over in China sometimes. So these things tended to move around the world. That's not saying that there was active trade and everybody was doing. Maybe it was just oddities or whatever, but the existing trade networks at the time. And so, as I've been telling you all this term, I haven't been wanting to overload you with screencasts, but if you've ever watched that series Breaking Bad, you can remember at least big picture that the one kid, this kind of the idiot kid, earlier, before the older chemist comes along, he thinks he's brewing meth specially by putting chili powder in it. And I think that was even his license plate in the first couple episodes. And it was just, that didn't have any effect on the meth. That was just stupid, right? But he considered that his signature. Same sort of thing is happening here with bronze. All right, so that goes over the monsoon systems here. We help trade. or we helped trade. They figured out better ways to trade. Why is this one? Remember Helen, the Greek world, that's what we're sort of concerned with in the West, because the Greeks had such a large influence in Western thought. So although the Greeks are going to fade from importance, they're not going to be an empire like Rome is an empire. And like the empire persisted in the Middle Ages and then through the Renaissance, Greek thinking never goes away. And some Greek values, especially values of individualism and so on. So that's just all we mean by that, for what in our section of the world anyway. So what are we getting from all this? Well, all sorts of stuff we don't think about. All right, spices, pepper, some cosmetics, gems and pearls. What do people want from the area of the world we've been in? Same sort of stuff I'm talking about. Wine, olive oil, jewelry, works of art. These extended down into Africa, the trade routes. Han Dynasty on the other side of the world is what's sometimes creating and maintaining a lot of these. So some of the trade have been around for a while, but they're controlling them. And they want them, by the way, want them to be peaceable, right? So it's bad, and there's a lot of it's tough to travel in the ancient world. So even I didn't cover before when Julius Caesar took over, you would think, my goodness, now I'm the emperor, I can do this. It's nothing of the sort, right? As soon as he takes over, his biggest problem that he has to deal with is pirates. And what the pirates are taking over are the grain shipments coming out of ancient Egypt. And he's thinking, my goodness gracious, why can't we regulate this better? They're getting off the ports okay, but they couldn't regulate it better because they couldn't organize the protection better because everyone's calendar wasn't synced up. So what he's got to be able to do is arrange protection against the pirates from across the Mediterranean area, and he's got to do this by telling the boats when to dispatch, but you can't do that if you don't have a uniform calendar, right? And so it's this sort of the humdrum, right? Well, so they're taking care of all this. The Han Dynasty is on the other side of the world in a different context. Caesar concerned with the naval routes at the time. We're concerned with the land routes here. And by the trade routes, we mean for the most part in the area you control. And what's really it's not like the Han, they may have emissaries that check up on everything from time to time, but they are letting merchants control sections of the road, more or less, making sure everything's peaceable. We don't have some skirmishes breaking out. People getting robbed is bad for business, for everyone. So what people do is they'll make entire lifetimes where, the family, their kids after them, their kids after them, and so on and so forth, just generations down the road. What they do is for a certain stretch of what we call the Silk Road, they're moving goods back and forth, right? So it's not the case that a family in China or a merchant in China is necessary. They're not all coming to Europe. They're going to the ends of wherever they're, like, we got to stop here and turn it over to somebody else, or wherever the markers were at the time. All right. But more or less, this is what it all cobbled together to. And it was extremely, beneficial, I guess I would say. So that across these sections of the world, you get stuff that you didn't have before. And so for Europeans, the stuff that we today in America are used to is not indigenous to Europe. It wasn't indigenous to America. It didn't start, the plants did not start growing here. So cloves, nutmeg, mace, cardamom, ginger, cinnamon, pepper, sesame oil. And if you were to research this on your own, there's going to be a whole lot more stuff. And I may refrain from my practice of trying to keep these short in a much later period when I go over how the Europeans got potatoes and pumpkins and squash from the New World at the time, and I mean had a really adverse reaction to it. The Germans on that side of it hated potatoes, and it was only after something really bad happened that they started eating potatoes, and that today we get the German potato salad. So it changed people's stuff. So we're concerned with the actual goods right now, but do realize, and what we're about to get into, is that ideas and religious ideas, get traded along or exchanged, get told along the way. Don't get traded, I guess. The stages that I was just talking about, it's just going to go over that here. And in such, as I said, and this is always the case. So Rome was a pretty multicultural city, and it was very large. Remember, the conquering cities will take who they consider the important people. So if you're not just any stonemason, but an advanced stonemason, the Romans are going to steal you from your place. And then same thing with people who can copy manuscripts and this and the other thing. But they don't have everything. And what in the places in Rome, for example, people say, well, my goodness gracious, it used to just be the ruling families, and now it's all these other people speaking different languages with their own customs, their own way of dress, and all that stuff. So while Rome itself was a very multicultural city, much like if you walk through Manhattan now, you can see you hear a bunch of different languages. So all large conquering cities, or like Babylon was like this back in the day. It was really multicultural because of what I was just talking about. But the conservative Romans who are not going to like that stuff anyway, they especially didn't like that some Roman women just really liked the silk attire because they could, I guess in their minds, they were showing too much in public, right? But I would imagine it would have had to have been cool in these days before air conditioning. Right, so and what you wear in ancient is extremely important. I've covered a little bit how textiles in general are important, but what you wear back in the day is, I mean, you can get you killed if you dress out of your station. And so we're not concerned here with, I'm just making a point in a different context about purple signifying royalty. Well, this was. Probably comes from a mollusk, a kind of a sea creature that they were harvesting off of the shallow parts off of ancient Egypt and getting the dye that was naturally created from these sea creatures. It smelled awful by all accounts. But then only the Pharaoh and and the people around the Pharaoh could wear this. And so the color itself would first of all, it's incredibly expensive because it became valuable just because they liked it. But nobody else could wear that. Okay, but same thing all through the ranks, so that even though it doesn't seem the case to us, even in periods much later than this, when we get into the Middle Ages, you should not dress outside of your station, because remember, their notion of identity was different than ours. So sometimes you kind of, when you put on the clothes, you became the thing is more closer to their thinking, depending upon where you are in the world and what exact time you are. All right, I think that's good enough for this one.